Hello everyone. So I just want to talk about this, and I don't know how really to phrase this or how to title this, but we'll talk about it anyway. But it's well into Cavan, but across the country too, that we see a lot of non-nationals, particularly from outside of Europe, from India, from other places like that, Bangladesh, etc., buying properties in Ireland. Now we see this very regularly, and from China too, and other places. And of course, as you know, the majority of Irish people cannot buy a house, can never own their house. It take 40 years before they ever own their house. In some cases 50 years, and I've seen many instances, unfortunately, like this in Cavan, that non-nationals, not even European nationals, more people from India will come over here with 400,000, buy a house straight out, and that'll be it. There was one incident where a doctor from India came over here, and there was an Irish couple looking for the house, and they couldn't get a mortgage. They couldn't get a mortgage, even though they had a decent enough job. They couldn't get it. The bank wouldn't give it to them. They didn't guarantee that they would get their money back, basically. And this Indian fellow came over here with no mortgage or anything. He just bought it straight out. And then two Irish people don't have they are still in the rented accommodation. That was a house in Kingscourt there. And this Indian fellow came over and bought it straight up. Like, there needs to be questions where he got the money for, because I know he's a doctor, but he shouldn't have 400,000 just lying around. If an Irish couple doesn't have 400,000 lying around, I don't know how he has it with his children and his wife. But of course, I think the government probably assisted them with the majority of the money, to be totally honest, because his ideology, etc., and who he is. But the simple reality is, and a lot of people have seen this in Cavan, a lot of people have seen this around the country too, and particularly in Cavan, obviously being in Ulster, a lot of people say this is the second plantation in a lot of cases, because there's people coming in that have no relation to this land, have no relation to Cavan, and they're coming in buying property. And a lot of people have a fair point in that, because the Irish people can't get it. I know so many young people in my age, in their 30s, beginning out in life, and some of them are young couples, and they can't get a house. They can't get a house to rent, let them buy a house, and they have never a hope of buying a house. And a lot of them, unfortunately, have immigrated. So it doesn't make sense how somebody from India can come over here, somebody from Bangladesh, somebody from China, somebody from Timbuktu can come over here and buy a house. It doesn't make any sense, because the Irish people can't do it, so I don't know how they can do it. Because even if some Irish person was able to buy a house, was able to get a loan to buy a house, because again, the banks still want to give out the money unless they have guarantees to get it back, basically. And particularly in that case before, there was a couple, it was a man and a woman, and they had decent enough jobs. He was an engineer, she was had her own bit. I think she had her own nail business for women, and even they couldn't get a loan, and they were going to pay 1,500 a month in a mortgage, 1,500 a month, which is still very good. The house was nearly 400,000. So it would have. I think it said it would have took 20 something years for them to pay it off, even though they were paying 1,500 a month, and that's not chicken feed. That's a lot of money. 1,500 a month, along with their electricity bill, along with the other bills. It's a lot. And they all have cows. They have two cows, etc. It would be a lot of money. They would have nothing basically left for themselves. What I'm trying to say. And they are some of the fortunate people in Irish society, and they still couldn't afford it. The bank wouldn't give them the loan, so they didn't have 200, 400,000 lying around. They had to go to the bank and ask the bank, and the bank said no, because they wouldn't, they didn't know whether they were going to get the money back reasonably enough, and of course interest, etc. So it would be probably 600,000 at the time they pay it off. But again, this goes back to the plantation, where the English settlers were put into Irish people's places, taking the land of Irish people, etc. And it's only the truth, and again, particularly in Ulster, it was very prevalent, that Irish people were kicked off their lands and English tenants were brought in, and Scottish tenants, to replace the Catholic Irish but with Protestant majority. And that happened in Ulster, that happened in Cavan a lot, particularly during the Great Famine. So many Irish tenants were evicted during the Great Famine because they couldn't afford to pay the bills, couldn't afford to pay the rent. And of course they were taken by English settlers. But a lot of people do see this, and there's been talked about, and a lot of people are too afraid to say it, but it is the truth that it really is the second plantation at this stage, what's happening in Cavan. Because the Irish people are leaving in their droves, and everybody else is coming in, and it doesn't make any sense how they can make a living. And if that's far-right extremists, so be it. But I'm just saying the simple truth. How can they do it and an Irish person can't do it? It's just a simple question. I never got an answer to this question. No politician will ever answer that. Why so many hundreds of thousands of Irish people are leaving in their 30s, the whole life ahead of them. And their parents, their grandparents stayed in this country, fought the war of independence, fought for Ireland's freedom throughout the centuries, and unfortunately they have to leave because they can't afford to buy, again, anything. They can't even afford to rent a house. They can't even afford to buy a house. When you have that situation, it's terrible. That nearly back in the 60s, when the country had no money whatsoever, people were nearly better off than they are today, young Irish people, because there was opportunity. There was some kind of opportunity for people. And people were willing to give them jobs, and the banks are willing to give money out to people, at a decent rate, not like insane rates, etc. But it is worrying to see this stuff, and I've seen it before. I've seen it many times that Indians particularly would come over here and buy houses, Now, I do think we should have a law in Cavan, if the government, central government will pass it, the county council should pass it, where no non-national, unless they're here in the country for 20 years or 15 years at most, particularly if you're non-European, I do think that should be it. That it should be 15 years to 20 years. You have to live in the country, you have to contribute to the country before you're allowed to buy your own property. I think that would be fair enough for Irish people, reason enough. And the same with European citizens. I do think it should be only 5 years for them. But say, for example, you're from Sweden and you want to buy a house now, and you have to be here 5 years and contribute 5 years to the economy before we let you buy your own house. And I think that's only fair, because that's putting Irish people first. That's giving them the opportunity to get the houses, if that makes sense, which is the right thing to do, because in any other country they would put their own citizens first, and that's what we need to do. Because at the moment in time we're not. And so many young Irish people are leaving, never to return, just to say, because there's no hope of them ever getting a house. Because there's too many people coming in from Timbuktu, etc., etc., and we see these cases from India, etc. They all have money, they all have the money to buy it, like straight up, they have the money to buy it, and Irish people can't. It doesn't make any sense, but sure. But the government obviously have schemes and stuff like that for people, Muslims particularly, etc. They have schemes to pay for property, etc., which is not right in my opinion. It's not right. Because there's so many young Irish people that can't even pay the rent. I know so many young people that just barely scraping by to pay the rent. And of course the rents are going up for the Irish people, not so much for anybody else, but for Irish people they're going up through the roof. And there's no movement of anything being done to help that. But you can see where people are getting this point, and people have said it many times, that it is the second plantation of Ulster, pretty much the second plantation of Cavan in a lot of cases. And there does need to be something to address, and again, you might see this as far right and racism, etc., but it is the truth. Even in Finland, take for example, for national security reasons, and I do think it's a national emergency first of all, but it's a national security thing too, because we want Irish people to have their own land and their own property. It's a national security issue too, as we've seen in Finland. The Finnish government have stopped Russian citizens buying property in Finland. The same as Chinese citizens, they're stopping them buying in new military facilities, etc., or military sensitive areas of the country. We should be doing the same here. Because I said there's probably people, new army barracks, etc., in this country, and you have military facilities that are non-nationalists, etc., coming in from China, etc., and staying near military facilities in Ireland. I nearly would say that's what's happening here too. But that's another issue for a different day, but I do think we should look at that too. But what I'm trying to say is we have to put our own citizens first, because at the end of the day, if we're going to let everybody come in here and buy houses, there'd be nothing for the Irish people, because at any given time there's not that many houses for sale. Like in Cavan alone, I think there's only 3 or 4 houses for rent. That's just for rent. But I think there's only about maybe 15 houses in the whole county Cavan for sale at the moment, and all of them are nearly over 300,000, nearly 400,000. So good luck in ever affording that house. There's none anyway under 300,000. You not get it. So for the only person who works a 9 to 5, it's impossible. It's nearly impossible to ever. You would be 50 years. You'd be paying it for 50 years to own your own property. Like, it's simply insane. Nobody could do it, basically, what I'm trying to say. No only person who works a 9 to 5, who goes out in the morning, can do it. Suppose there's only the very top of society, and even as I said, with that family particularly, an engineer and her own their own parlour, etc. And they still can't get they can't even get a loan from the bank to pay a mortgage. They can't even get it. The bank wouldn't give it to them. Even though they're going to pay 1,500, the bank still didn't want. The bank wanted more money off them a month. To pay off their loan, because obviously they didn't have 400,000 just lying about, to buy it, like this Indian vow. And it's only the truth. Like, we do have to discuss this, that it is worrying. It is very, very worrying. We can see why people are very whiz up about it. I see so many people whiz up about it. And it's only the truth. And I've heard many people in Cavan say this too, that they feel like it's the second plantation too. When you look around Cavan too at the moment, on the streets, etc., it nearly does seem like you're in another country. And it is only the truth, and if that's racism far right, so be it. But it really, really does. When you really go around Cavan in some parts, it really does. Like, you would not nearly see anybody that you know. And again, I've said about this before, you nearly won't come across anybody that you know. The war from Timbuktu and etc. Nobody that you knew. Even when I was in town the other day, I see nobody that I knew, nobody at all on the street that I knew by name. I've seen them before, but I don't know them by name, and that just goes to show you that there's so many new people in Cavan, that people don't know who they are or where they come from, and they don't want to assimilate. They don't want to talk to people. Usually I know the majority of people. I would know them by name, I know them to see. But the majority of people, these people that just come in, we don't have a clue who they are. We don't know who they are. That's just a simple thing. But anyway, let me know what you think. Subscribe for more, and bye.